The dust storm hit Silver Creek just after noon on a Tuesday, the kind that turned the sky orange and made breathing feel like swallowing sand. Evelyn Rose stood inside Hutchinson's general store, watching through the filthy window as the wind ripped shingles off roofs and sent tumbleweeds cartwheeling down Main Street. She'd seen worse. 3 winters in Montana mining camps, 2 summers following railroad crews through territories so raw they didn't have names yet. A spring in Wyoming territory where she'd watched a woman die in childbirth because the nearest doctor was 40 miles away and nobody thought a female life worth the ride. Evelyn was 32 years old, tall, taller than most men felt comfortable with. Sharp cheekbones that made her face look severe even when she smiled, which wasn't often. Dark hair she kept pinned tight because loose hair got you noticed, and being noticed in frontier towns rarely ended well for women without husbands. Her hands were rough, scarred from years of work that polite society pretended women didn't do. Laundry for miners, cooking in logging camps, cleaning rooms in brothels when that was the only work available, and hunger made pride irrelevant. She wasn't pretty, not in the way men wrote songs about, not soft or delicate or any of the things that made frontier bachelors send away for mail-order brides with promises of love and security. Evelyn knew exactly what she was: functional, useful, forgettable, the kind of woman people hired but never chose. "Mail's here," old Tom Hutchinson grunted, dragging the leather sack through the door. Dust followed him inside like a living thing. He dumped the bag on the counter and started sorting through letters with hands so gnarled by arthritis they looked like tree roots. Evelyn turned back to the shelf where she'd been organizing canned goods. She didn't get mail. Nobody wrote to women like her. Rowe. Evelyn Rowe. She froze. Tom squinted at an envelope, holding it close to his face. "That you?" "Yeah." Her voice came out rougher than she intended. He tossed it across the counter. "Fancy seal on that one. Somebody die and leave you money?" "Probably not." She picked up the envelope carefully, like it might bite. Heavy paper. Wax seal pressed with some kind of ranch brand she didn't recognize. Postmarked from a place called Black Hollow Ridge up in the Northern Territories. She didn't open it until she was back in the tiny room she rented above the seamstress shop. 1 window. A bed that sagged in the middle. A trunk containing everything she owned. The room smelled like old wood and the lavender soap the seamstress used downstairs. Evelyn sat on the bed and broke the seal. The letter was written in surprisingly neat handwriting for a rancher. "To whomever receives this, I am a widower with 5 children ranging from age 6 to 14. My ranch sits in the Black Hollow territory, 3 days' ride north of Silver Creek. We are remote. The work is hard. Winters here have killed stronger people than you probably are. I am not looking for a wife. I am looking for someone willing to help raise children who have lost their mother. Someone who can survive conditions most people run from. Someone who understands that comfort and romance are luxuries we cannot afford. In exchange, I offer room and board, fair wages, and a partnership in keeping this ranch alive. If you are still reading, you are either desperate or curious. Either quality might be useful here. Reply if interested. Do not reply if you expect easy. Gideon Vale." Evelyn read it 3 times. Most women would have laughed, or thrown it away, or both. She didn't either. Because 3 months earlier, she'd sat in Dr. Morrison's cramped office above the Silver Creek Saloon while he delivered news that changed everything. "The scarlet fever you survived as a girl did more damage than anyone realized," he'd said, not quite meeting her eyes. "The infection. It affected your ability to conceive. I'm sorry, Miss Rowe. You won't be able to have children." She'd nodded, said thank you, walked out, hadn't cried until she was 2 miles outside town, sitting alone on a rock outcropping where nobody could see her fall apart. That diagnosis had killed every plan she'd carefully built, every small hope she'd protected. Marriage wasn't an option anymore. Frontier men wanted wives who could produce heirs. Motherhood, the one dream she'd allowed herself to keep despite everything else the world had taken from her, was gone. The future she'd imagined had collapsed into nothing. So when she read Gideon Vale's letter, she didn't see romance or adventure. She saw a door that was still open. A chance to raise children even if she could never bear them herself. A purpose when she'd thought all purposes were gone. That night, she wrote her reply by candlelight. Mr. Vale, I am not desperate. I am not curious. I am practical. I have worked in mining camps, railroad towns, and places where survival required more than hope. I do not scare easily. I do not expect easy. I do not quit. If you need someone reliable, I am that. When should I arrive? Evelyn Rowe. She mailed it the next morning before she could change her mind. The reply came faster than she expected. Just 5 words on a torn piece of paper. First available freight wagon north. Bank. The wagon left Silver Creek on a cold morning in early September. Evelyn owned so little that everything fit in one battered trunk and a canvas bag. The driver, a tobacco-stained man named Earl who smelled like whiskey and wet dog, barely looked at her when she climbed aboard. You the one headed to Black Hollow Ridge? Yeah. Alone? Yeah. He spat into the dirt. You know that's Vale's place. I know. You know his wife died up there? I know. Earl shook his head. Your funeral. They rode in silence after that. The journey north took them through terrain that grew steadily more brutal. The first day passed through rolling grassland dotted with abandoned homesteads, wooden skeletons of failed dreams, doors hanging open like mouths screaming at the sky. By the second day, they were climbing into foothills where pine forests crowded so thick the sunlight barely reached the trail. The temperature dropped. Snow appeared on distant peaks even though autumn had barely started. Earl stopped the wagon once to let the horses rest near a half-frozen stream. Still time to turn back, he said. Evelyn didn't answer. She stood at the edge of the water, watching ice crystals form along the rocks. Behind her, wolves howled from somewhere deep in the trees. This was the kind of place that killed people. She'd survived worse. They reached the Black Hollow way station late on the second day. Just a sagging building, a corral, and a water trough surrounded by nothing but mountains and wind. Earl unhitched the horses while Evelyn waited on the porch, trunk at her feet, watching the tree line for movement. That's when she saw him. Gideon Vale. He emerged from the trail on a massive chestnut horse, moving slow and deliberate through the fading light. Even from a distance, she could tell he was big, broad through the shoulders, thick arms, the kind of size that came from years of physical labor, not from being well fed. He wore a heavy coat dark with trail dust, a hat pulled low, and when he got close enough for her to see his face, she noticed the scar first. A pale line running from his left temple down across his jaw, disappearing into the collar of his coat. Not fresh, but not ancient either. The kind of scar that came with a story nobody wanted to tell. His eyes were worse than the scar. Dark, exhausted, haunted by something more permanent than lack of sleep. This was not a man looking for a second chance at love. This was a man barely holding on. He dismounted without hurry and walked toward the porch. Up close, he was even bigger than she'd thought. At least 6'3", hands like slabs of granite. But he moved carefully, like someone who'd learned that size could frighten people. Evelyn Rowe? Yeah. He studied her for a long moment. Not in the way men usually looked at women, assessing attractiveness, calculating value. He was measuring something else. Durability, maybe. Strength. You came, he said finally. You asked me to. Most people don't follow through. I'm not most people. Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face and died. No, I expect you're not. He grabbed her trunk like it weighed nothing and secured it to his horse. Earl had already disappeared inside the way station, clearly wanting no part of whatever happened next. It's another 2 hours to the ranch, Gideon said. We ride until we get there. No stops. You fall behind, I come back for you, but we lose time. Understood? Understood. He handed her the reins to a sturdy gray mare. She's steady, won't spook easy. Stay close to me. These trails get dangerous after dark. Evelyn mounted without help. She'd learned to ride working for a cattle drive 5 years back, and while she wasn't graceful about it, she was competent. Gideon watched her settle into the saddle, then nodded once. Let's go. They rode north into the mountains as twilight bled into full dark. The trail narrowed until it was barely wide enough for the horses. On one side, the mountain rose in a sheer wall of rock and pine. On the other, the ground dropped away into blackness so complete she couldn't see the bottom. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of snow and something else, something wild and dangerous that made the horses nervous. Gideon didn't speak, Didn't look back to check on her. Just kept moving forward at a steady pace, navigating the trail from memory because no sane person could see more than a few feet ahead. An hour in, Evelyn heard something howl, not distant, close. Her horse sidestepped nervously. She tightened her grip on the reins, forcing the mare steady. "Wolves!" Gideon called back without turning. "They won't bother us unless we stop." "And if we stop, we don't." Another howl answered the first, then another. Evelyn counted at least 4 distinct voices, maybe more. They were being followed. She kept riding. The terrain opened up slightly as they crested a ridge. Below them, barely visible in the moonlight, she could make out a valley carved between mountains. A thin line of smoke rose from somewhere in the darkness. "That's it," Gideon said. "Black Hollow Ranch." From this distance, it looked impossibly small. Fragile. A tiny human foothold in an ocean of wilderness that wanted it gone. The descent took another 30 minutes of careful navigation down a switchback trail. By the time they reached level ground, Evelyn's hands ached from gripping the reins and her back was stiff from the cold. Then the ranch emerged fully from the shadows, and her stomach dropped. The barn roof sagged dangerously on one side, held up by what looked like hastily placed support beams. Fences ran crooked across the property, boards missing or hanging loose. The main house was dark except for a single lantern burning in one window. Behind the barn, she could see cattle moving in the shadows. Too few of them, ribs showing even from here. This wasn't a struggling ranch. This was a place dying slowly. Gideon dismounted and tied his horse to a post outside the barn. He didn't explain the obvious decay, didn't apologize, just grabbed her trunk and started toward the house. "Children are asleep," he said quietly. "You'll meet them tomorrow. Your room is upstairs, second door on the left. Outhouse is behind the house. Water pump is by the barn, but it freezes at night this time of year, so fill what you need before bed. Breakfast is at dawn. Any questions?" Evelyn had about 1,000 questions. She asked none of them. "No." He nodded. "Good." The inside of the house was warmer than she expected, but chaotic in a way that spoke of nobody having time or energy to maintain order. Dishes were stacked in a wash basin. Clothing hung over chairbacks. The floor needed sweeping. Everything was functional, but barely. Gideon carried her trunk upstairs without another word. She followed him down a narrow hallway to a small room containing a bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over the dark valley. This was... He stopped, started again. "You'll be comfortable enough here." He left before she could respond. Evelyn stood in the doorway, listening to his heavy footsteps descend the stairs, listening to the creak of a door opening and closing somewhere below, listening to the vast, pressing silence of the mountains outside. She set her bag on the bed and walked to the window. The moon had risen higher now, casting silver light across the snow-dusted peaks. Somewhere out there, wolves were still howling. Somewhere closer, cattle were freezing because there weren't enough hands to bring them in properly. This family was drowning, and they'd hired her to bail water while the ship sank. Most people would have been terrified. Evelyn just rolled up her sleeves. She woke before dawn to the sound of someone moving around downstairs. The house was freezing, cold enough that her breath fogged the air. She dressed quickly in the dim light, pulling on the practical wool dress and heavy shawl she'd worn on the wagon north. When she descended the stairs, she found Gideon in the kitchen, trying to coax fire from a reluctant stove. "It needs more kindling," she said. He looked up, surprised. "You don't have to. I'm already awake." She crossed to the stove, assessed the situation, and began rebuilding the fire properly. Within minutes, flames were crackling steadily. Gideon watched her with an expression she couldn't read. "You've done this before." "I've done a lot of things before." Most women who answered that advertisement lasted less than a week. "How many came before me?" "3. What happened to them?" "Winter," he said simply. "Or the children, or both." Evelyn started pulling down dishes from the cupboard. "Where do you keep the coffee?" "Top shelf, but you don't..." "If I'm going to be here, I'm going to be useful." That was the deal. He didn't argue, just retrieved a battered tin of coffee grounds and set it on the counter beside her. They worked in silence after that. Evelyn made coffee while Gideon hauled water from the pump outside. By the time light started seeping through the windows, the kitchen smelled like brewing coffee and the bacon she'd found in the cold cellar. That's when the children appeared. The oldest came first, a girl, 14, maybe 15, with dark hair tangled from sleep in her mother's eyes. She stopped dead in the doorway when she saw Evelyn at the stove. "Who are you?" "Evelyn Rowe." "Why are you in our kitchen?" "Making breakfast." The girl's expression hardened instantly. "We don't need—" "Nora." Gideon's voice was quiet but carried weight. "Sit down." "She's replacing Mom." "Nora's—" "That's what this is, isn't it?" The girl's voice cracked. "You hired someone to replace her." The younger children had gathered in the hallway behind her now. 2 boys, maybe 10 and 8, and a little girl clutching a rag doll. They all stared at Evelyn with identical expressions of suspicion and fear. The smallest child, a boy no older than 6, started crying. "I want Mama," he said. The room fell apart after that. The little girl ran back upstairs. One of the boys followed her. The older boy just stood there, looking angry and lost. Nora glared at Evelyn like this was all her fault. Gideon started to say something, but Evelyn stopped him. "Let me." She crossed the kitchen slowly, conscious of 5 pairs of eyes tracking her movement. When she reached Nora, she didn't try to touch her, didn't offer empty comfort. "You're right," Evelyn said quietly. "I can't replace your mother. Nobody can. I'm not trying to." "Then why are you here?" "Because your father asked for help, and I need a place where I can be useful." "We don't need you." "Maybe not. But he does." Nora's jaw tightened. Behind her, the crying boy had wrapped himself around his father's leg. The older boy still hadn't moved. "I lost someone too," Evelyn continued. "Different, but I understand what it feels like when the world just keeps going like nothing happened. Like you're supposed to be fine now." Something flickered in Nora's expression. Not acceptance, not even softening, but recognition, maybe. The acknowledgement that this stranger understood pain even if she was still unwelcome. "Breakfast will be ready in 10 minutes, Evelyn said. "You don't have to eat with me." "But you should eat something." She turned back to the stove, giving them space. Slowly, the children dispersed. The little girl came back downstairs. The boys settled at the table, still watching Evelyn warily. Nora remained in the doorway for another long moment before finally, reluctantly, taking a seat. Evelyn served breakfast without commentary. Bacon, eggs from the henhouse, bread that was stale but edible. She didn't try to force conversation, didn't ask questions, just put food in front of hungry children and poured coffee for Gideon. The meal was silent except for the scrape of forks on plates. But everyone ate. Afterward, Gideon sent the children to their morning chores. Nora left without a word. The younger ones scattered quickly, clearly eager to escape the awkward stranger in their kitchen. Only Gideon remained, studying Evelyn across the table. "That could have gone worse," he said finally. "Could have gone better, too. Nora's the hardest. She's been trying to hold this family together since her mother died. Thinks she has to protect everyone. Including from me. Especially from you." Evelyn started gathering dishes. "She'll come around or she won't. Either way, I have work to do." "What work?" She gestured at the house around them. "All of it." Over the next week, Evelyn learned the true scope of what she'd walked into. The ranch was hemorrhaging resources. Food stores were critically low because nobody had time to properly preserve the summer harvest. Clothing needed mending. The children were wearing things so patched and worn they'd barely survive winter. The barn roof situation was worse than it looked. One heavy snow and the whole structure would collapse. Several sections of fence were down, allowing cattle to wander into dangerous terrain. And winter was coming fast. She'd seen frontier men try to manage households while working full-time land. It never worked. Something always failed, usually the children's well-being, sometimes the land itself. Gideon was trying to be both parents, ranch foreman, and sole laborer all at once. He was failing at all of it through no fault of his own. So Evelyn stopped asking permission and started fixing things. She reorganized the root cellar, throwing out food that had spoiled and properly storing what remained. She hauled water even when her shoulders screamed. She mended clothing by lamplight after the children slept. She learned which chickens were still laying and which needed to be butchered before they consumed resources without producing anything. The children watched her constantly those first days, testing, waiting for her to quit or fail, or prove herself as temporary as everything else in their lives. Evelyn ignored their stares and kept working. On the fourth day, the youngest boy, Caleb, approached her while she was hanging laundry in the freezing morning air. "Are you going to leave?" he asked. "Not planning on it." The other ladies left. "I'm not the other ladies." He considered this seriously. "Nora says you'll leave when winter gets bad." "Nora doesn't know me yet." "Will you know me? After winter?" The question hit harder than it should have. This child had learned that adults disappeared, that nothing permanent could be trusted. Evelyn knelt so they were eye level. "I'm not leaving, Caleb. Not because of winter. Not because it's hard. Not because your sister doesn't like me yet. Understood?" He nodded slowly. Then, without warning, he hugged her. Brief, fierce, gone before she could fully process it. When he ran back toward the house, Evelyn stood there with wet laundry in her hands, something uncomfortable and warm lodged in her chest. She'd been at Black Hollow Ranch less than a week, and already these broken children were changing her. That night, after the house fell silent, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with Gideon, going over winter preparations. "We need more firewood than what you have stockpiled," she said. "At least 3 cords more if we're going to keep the house warm and the pipes from freezing." "I know." "And the barn roof needs reinforcement before the first heavy snow." "I know." "The cattle." "I know." His voice carried an edge of exhaustion so deep it was almost physical. "I know all of it. I just don't have enough hands or hours to fix everything." Evelyn set down her pencil. "Then we prioritize. What kills us first if we don't address it?" He looked at her for a long moment. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone softer, someone who'd need protecting." "I've never been soft, and I've never needed protecting." "No," he said quietly. "I don't expect you have." Something passed between them in that moment. Not attraction, nothing as simple or dangerous as that, but recognition. The understanding that they were both survivors who'd learned not to expect gentleness from the world. The barn roof first, Gideon decided. If that collapses, we lose the livestock, then firewood. Then a crash erupted from upstairs. They both moved instantly. Gideon took the stairs 3 at a time. Evelyn followed, her heart hammering. They found Nora in her room, standing amid broken glass, her hand bleeding. "I'm fine," she said immediately. She wasn't fine. Gideon started toward her, but Evelyn moved faster, grabbing a clean cloth from the hallway and wrapping it around Nora's hand before the girl could protest. "What happened?" "Nothing. The lamp fell. It's fine." "You're bleeding." "I said it's fine." But Nora's hands were shaking, not from pain, from something else, something deeper and more jagged. Evelyn looked at the broken lamp, at the way Nora's other hand was clenched into a fist, at the barely suppressed tears the girl was fighting. This wasn't about a lamp. "Go ahead and cry," Evelyn said quietly. "Nobody here will think less of you for it." "I don't cry." "Maybe you should." "Why? Because that fixes things? Because falling apart helps?" "No. Because you're 14 years old and you've been trying to be the adult in this house for 2 years, and that's not fair, and it's not sustainable, and eventually something breaks." Nora's composure shattered. She didn't make a sound, but tears streamed down her face in the lamplight from the hall. Gideon moved to comfort her, but stopped when Evelyn gave a tiny shake of her head. "Let her have this," that gesture said. "Let her be a child who's allowed to hurt." When Nora finally spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "I can't do it anymore." "You don't have to," Evelyn said. "That's why I'm here." "But what if you leave too?" There it was, the real fear beneath all the hostility. "I'm not leaving," Evelyn said, and meant it. The girl looked up, searching Evelyn's face for the lie. Found none, and slowly, tentatively, let herself be led to bed. Evelyn cleaned up the broken glass while Gideon got Nora settled. By the time he came back downstairs, she had the kitchen back in order and water boiling for tea. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For seeing what she needed, for not—" He stopped. "The others who came here, they saw the children as obstacles, problems to manage. You see them as people." "They are people." "I know, but not everyone remembers that." He poured himself tea and sat heavily at the table. In the lamplight, Evelyn could see just how exhausted he really was. The lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair, the weight he carried that had nothing to do with muscles. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead." "Why did you wait so long to ask for help?" He was quiet for a long time. "Pride, mostly. Thought I could handle it. Thought asking meant admitting I'd failed them." "You haven't failed anyone." "Haven't I? Look at this place. Look at them. They're alive," Evelyn said. "They're fed. They're still here. That's not failure. That's winning." Gideon studied her across the table. "Where did you come from, Evelyn Rowe?" "Nowhere important." "I don't believe that." "Believe what you want. I'm here now. That's what matters." Outside, wind rattled the windows. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. Winter was coming fast and hard, and Black Hollow Ranch was barely ready. But for the first time in months, maybe years, Gideon Vale didn't feel like he was facing it alone. And Evelyn, sitting in a warm kitchen in a house full of broken people who needed her, realized something she hadn't expected. She didn't feel alone either. The first snow came 2 weeks after Evelyn arrived, falling silent and thick through the pre-dawn darkness. She woke to the sound of Gideon cursing downstairs, followed by the crash of something heavy hitting the floor. By the time she dressed and descended, he was already bundled in his heavy coat, pulling on work gloves with hands that moved too fast. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough. 3 sections of north fence went down overnight, cattle scattered into the high country." He grabbed a coil of rope from the hook by the door. "I need to bring them back before they freeze or the wolves get them." "I'll come with you." "No. You can't manage that many animals alone." "I've done it before." "And how'd that work out?" He stopped, jaw tight. "Evelyn, I can ride. I can rope. And 2 sets of eyes find strays faster than one." She crossed her arms. "You can argue with me, or we can stop wasting time." For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Then he grabbed a second coat from the peg and tossed it to her. "Keep up," was all he said. The children were still asleep when they left. Evelyn had laid out breakfast preparations the night before. Bread, preserves, instructions written in clear letters on a scrap of paper. Nora would manage. The girl was more capable than she gave herself credit for. Outside, the world had transformed into something alien and beautiful and deadly. Snow covered everything in smooth white silence. The mountains rose like ghosts in the gray morning light. Temperature had dropped so low that Evelyn's breath crystallized instantly. Gideon saddled the horses without speaking. His movements were efficient, practiced, the actions of someone who'd done this 1,000 times in worse conditions. When he handed her the reins to the gray mare, his expression was unreadable. "Stay within sight of me," he said. "These trails get dangerous when you can't see the edges. Snow hides ravines." "Understood." They rode north toward the high pastures, following tracks that were already filling with fresh snowfall. The wind picked up as they climbed, cutting through Evelyn's coat like it was made of paper. Her fingers went numb inside her gloves. Her face burned with cold. Gideon didn't slow down. An hour in, they found the first of the scattered cattle. 5 head huddled against a rock outcropping, snow piling on their backs. Gideon roped the lead cow and started driving them south. Evelyn flanked the other side, keeping the animals grouped and moving. It should have been simple. Then one of the younger steers bolted. The animal crashed through deep snow toward a tree line, panicked and stupid with fear. Gideon wheeled his horse to follow, but Evelyn was already moving, spurring the gray mare forward in pursuit. "Evelyn, wait!" She didn't wait. The steer plunged into the trees with Evelyn close behind. Branches whipped past her face. Snow dumped from overhead in heavy sheets. She could hear Gideon shouting something behind her, but the words were lost in the wind. The steer broke into a small clearing and stopped, sides heaving. Evelyn approached slowly, rope ready. The animal's eyes rolled white with fear. "Easy," she murmured. "Easy now." She got within 10 feet before the ground beneath her horse shifted. Not ground, a snow-covered ravine. The mare stumbled, legs scrambling for purchase on ice and empty air. Evelyn threw herself sideways as the horse screamed and went down, sliding toward the edge of a drop she couldn't see but could hear, rocks tumbling into darkness below. She hit the ground hard, all the air knocked from her lungs. Rolled. Her hand found a tree root, and she grabbed it, fingers digging into frozen wood as her legs swung over nothing. Then Gideon was there. He seized her coat with both hands and hauled her back from the edge with enough force that they both fell backward into the snow. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Evelyn could hear her heartbeat hammering in her ears, could feel Gideon's hand still gripping her coat like he was afraid she'd vanish if he let go. "You stupid—" He didn't finish, just sat there in the snow, breathing hard, staring at her with an expression somewhere between fury and terror. "What the hell were you thinking?" "I was thinking we needed that steer." "I don't give a damn about the steer." The words hung between them. Evelyn pushed herself up slowly, testing for injuries. Everything hurt, but nothing felt broken. The gray mare had scrambled to safety and stood 20 feet away, shaking but unharmed. The steer was long gone. "I'm fine," she said. "You almost died." "But I didn't." "You could have—" He stopped, stood, turned away from her and pressed both hands against a tree trunk like he needed something solid to hold on to. "Don't do that again." "Do what?" "Risk yourself like you don't matter." Something in his voice made her chest tight. "Gideon, I can't." He didn't finish, just shook his head and walked back toward his horse. They rode in silence after that, gathering the remaining cattle without incident. By the time they returned to the ranch, the sun was high and weak through the clouds. The children had managed breakfast without burning the house down. Nora stood on the porch watching them approach, arms crossed, expression carefully neutral. "Everyone accounted for?" she asked. "Mostly," Gideon said. Nora's eyes flicked to Evelyn, taking in the torn coat sleeve and bruise forming on her cheekbone. "What happened?" "Nothing. Doesn't look like nothing." "It's handled," Evelyn said. "How's Caleb?" "He won't eat." "Why not?" "Because you weren't here and he thought you left." The words shouldn't have hit as hard as they did. Evelyn dismounted, wincing as her bruised ribs protested, and headed for the house. She found Caleb sitting at the kitchen table, small and miserable, staring at an untouched plate of bread. "Hey," she said quietly. He looked up, his face crumpled with relief. "You came back. Told you I would. But Miss Hannah didn't come back, and Miss Caroline didn't come back, and I'm not them." She sat down across from him, ignoring her screaming muscles. "I don't break promises, Caleb. If I say I'm staying, I'm staying. Even when it's scary? Especially then." He considered this with the seriousness of someone who'd learned too young that adults lied. Then he picked up the bread and ate. That afternoon, while Gideon worked on emergency fence repairs and the older children did their chores, Evelyn finally had a chance to properly assess the household supplies. What she found made her stomach drop. They had maybe 6 weeks of food if they rationed carefully. The root cellar contained potatoes going soft, carrots beginning to wither, and 3 jars of preserves. The smokehouse held 2 slabs of bacon and a ham that had seen better days. Flour was running low. Sugar was already gone. Salt was precious. 6 weeks, and winter in Black Hollow lasted 5 months. She found Gideon in the barn that evening, working by lantern light to reinforce the support beams holding up the damaged section of roof. "We need to talk about supplies," she said. He didn't stop hammering. "I know." "Do you? Because unless something changes, we'll be eating boot leather by January." "I'm aware of the situation." "Then what's the plan?" "The plan is we survive." "That's not a plan. That's hope." The hammer paused. Gideon set it down slowly and turned to face her. In the lantern light, the exhaustion in his face was stark. "What do you want me to say, Evelyn? That I don't have enough money for a proper supply run? That the bank has been circling this place for months waiting for me to default on the mortgage? That every choice I make is choosing which disaster to address while hoping the others don't kill us first? I want you to stop pretending you can handle all of this alone." "I'm not alone anymore. You're here." "Yeah, I am. So let me help with more than cooking and mending." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we pool resources. I have some money saved. Not much, but enough for a serious supply run if we're smart about it." "I can't take your money." "You're not taking it. I'm investing it in not starving to death this winter." "Evelyn, stop." She stepped closer. "Stop treating me like a guest you have to protect. I know what I signed up for. I know this place is barely hanging on. But I also know that pride doesn't keep children fed and stubbornness doesn't fix broken fences. So either we work together on this or we both watch this ranch fail. Your choice. He stared at her for a long moment. Then something in his expression shifted. Not surrender exactly, but the acknowledgement that he'd run out of options for noble solitude. How much do you have saved? Enough for 2 months of supplies if we buy smart. And then what? And then we figure out the next problem. That's how survival works. Gideon picked up the hammer again, but didn't resume working. You're not what I expected, he said quietly. You mentioned that already. I thought I was hiring help, someone to cook and watch the children while I kept the ranch running. And instead I got a partner who nearly died chasing a cow this morning. Steer, she corrected, and I didn't die. Stop being dramatic. The corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. We'll go to town day after tomorrow, leave before dawn. It's a full day's ride there and back. What about the children? Nora can manage for 1 day? You sure about that? No, but we don't have another option. 2 days later, Evelyn woke in darkness to find Gideon already moving around downstairs. She dressed quickly, braided her hair tight, and descended to find him packing saddlebags with empty supply sacks. Coffee's hot, he said without looking up. You sleep at all? Some. Liar. This time he did smile, barely, but it was there. They left instructions for Nora, checked on the younger children one last time, and rode out as the first gray light touched the mountains. The trail to town was brutal, 12 miles of frozen ground and steep descents that required constant attention. They rode in companionable silence, the kind that comes from two people who've learned they can work together without filling every moment with words. Halfway there, they stopped to rest the horses near a half-frozen stream. Can I ask you something? Gideon said. Go ahead. Why'd you really answer my advertisement? Evelyn took a long moment before answering. Because I was out of other options. That's not the whole truth. No, it's not. She stared at the water moving slow and dark beneath the ice. 3 months before I got your letter, a doctor told me I can't have children. Something from when I was sick as a girl. And I realized that every plan I'd made, every future I'd imagined, it all required something I can't have. Gideon was quiet, listening. So when I read about a widower with 5 kids who needed help, she continued, I thought, maybe that's the door I'm supposed to walk through. Maybe I can't carry children, but I can raise them. Maybe that's enough. Is it? He asked. Enough? I don't know yet. But it's more than I had before. For what it's worth, Gideon said quietly, those kids already look at you different than they looked at the others. Different how? Like maybe you'll stay. They reached town by midday. Black Hollow Settlement was barely worthy of the name. 24 buildings clustered around a muddy main street, serving ranchers and trappers from 100 miles in every direction. The general store dominated the center, its false front painted optimistically despite the decay visible everywhere else. Inside, the proprietor, a heavy-set man named Hutchins, with a merchant's suspicious eyes, looked up when they entered. Vale, didn't expect to see you before spring. Supply run, Gideon said simply. Hutchins' gaze slid to Evelyn. This the new housekeeper I heard about. She has a name, Gideon said, his voice flat. I'm sure she does. Hutchins smiled without warmth. Just surprised you're still making hires, given your situation with the bank. My situation with the bank is none of your concern. Everything's my concern when people owe credit. You settle up last season's account? You know I did. Good. Then I hope you brought cash for this visit. Can't extend more credit until spring contracts are settled. Evelyn watched the interaction with growing understanding. This wasn't just about supplies. This was about power. About small men wielding what little authority they had to make others feel small. We're paying cash, she said. Hutchins looked at her properly for the first time. That's so? That's so. Now we need flour, cornmeal, salt, sugar, coffee, dried beans, dried apples if you have them, bacon, ham, and ammunition. That's a serious order. It's a long winter. Cost you serious money too. Then it's good we brought serious money. She set a small leather purse on the counter. Start filling the order. We'll check your prices against our list. Something shifted in Hutchins' expression. He'd been prepared to negotiate with Gideon, to leverage debt and desperation into favorable terms. But this woman wasn't negotiating, she was dictating. He didn't like it, but he started filling the order. While Hutchins worked, two men entered the store. Both wore expensive coats and carried themselves with the confidence of people who owned things. The older one, late 50s, gray-streaked hair, cold eyes, surveyed the store like he was calculating its value. "Vale," he said. "Surprised to see you in town." Gideon's posture changed subtly, defensive, guarded. Mercer. So this was Mercer Crow, the neighboring rancher Evelyn had heard mentioned in town gossip, the man who'd been pressuring Gideon to sell. Mercer's attention shifted to Evelyn. His smile was all teeth and no kindness. "And who's this?" "Evelyn Rowe," she said before Gideon could answer. "I work at Black Hollow Ranch." "Work." Mercer made the word sound dirty. "That what they're calling it now?" "Mercer." Gideon's voice carried warning. "Relax, just making conversation." Mercer leaned against the counter, deliberately casual. "Heard you hired another housekeeper. That's, what, the fourth one?" "Third," Evelyn corrected. "Ah, only third. My mistake." His smile widened. "Hope you last longer than the others. Winter up there is rough on city women." "I'm not from the city." "No? Where are you from then?" "Nowhere that matters." Everything matters when you're trying to survive Black Hollow winters, especially when you're working for a ranch that's one bad season from collapse. "That's enough," Gideon said quietly. "I'm just being honest. You've been bleeding resources for 2 years, Vale. The bank knows it. The whole territory knows it. Hell, even your kids probably know it." Mercer straightened. "My offer still stands. I'll buy the north section fair price. Gives you breathing room. Keeps the rest of the ranch viable." "Not interested." "You should be. Because when that mortgage comes due in spring, what happens to those kids if you default?" The temperature in the store seemed to drop. Gideon moved toward Mercer, but Evelyn stepped between them smoothly, her hand touching Gideon's arm in a gesture that was both calming and restraining. "We're finished with our business here," she said to Mercer. "You're welcome to conduct yours." Mercer studied her with new interest. "You got spine, I'll give you that. But spine doesn't keep cattle alive in blizzards, and it doesn't pay banknotes." "No, but hard work does, and we've got plenty of that. For now, let's see if you're still this confident come March." He tipped his hat mockingly and left, his companion following. The store fell silent. Hutchins finished tallying their order without comment, clearly wanting no part of whatever political maneuvering was happening. Evelyn paid in cash, counted out the change carefully, and helped load supplies onto their pack horses. They were a mile outside town before Gideon spoke again. "You didn't have to do that." "Do what?" "Step in. I can handle Mercer Crow." "I know you can, but why should you have to handle him alone?" "Because it's my problem. It's our problem. I live there too." She adjusted her reins, watching the trail ahead. "What's his actual play? Why does he want your land so badly?" "Water rights. The north section has the best creek access in the territory. Control that and you control grazing for 3 valleys. So he's trying to force you out. He's been trying for 2 years. Since Sarah died, he figured I'd fold. And I haven't, which makes him dangerous." "How dangerous?" "The kind that makes fences get cut and cattle go missing, and supply deliveries get delayed." Gideon's jaw tightened. "I can't prove it, but I know." Evelyn processed this. "We need to be smarter then." "Smarter how?" "I don't know yet, but there's always a way to beat men like him. You just have to find their weakness." They rode through the afternoon, making good time on the return journey. By the time Black Hollow Ranch appeared in the distance, twilight was settling across the mountains. Smoke rose from the chimney. Lantern light glowed in the windows. It looked like home. That thought startled Evelyn. She'd lived in dozens of places over the years. None of them had ever felt like home. They were just locations where she worked and slept until it was time to move on. But this place, with its broken fences and difficult children and overwhelming problems, felt different. Felt like somewhere she belonged. Nora met them on the porch, relief evident despite her attempt to appear casual. "Everything okay?" Gideon asked. "Fine. Caleb cried for an hour after you left, but he settled down. Grace won't sleep without Evelyn reading to her. Thomas and Marcus got in a fight over nothing. The usual." "Sounds manageable," Evelyn said. "Barely." Nora helped unload supplies. Did you get sugar? Some. Why? Because I promised Caleb we'd make molasses cookies if you came back. When I came back, Evelyn corrected gently. Right, when. Nora carried a sack of flour inside. He's been asking about you all day. Later, after the supplies were stored and the children fed and put to bed, Evelyn stood in the kitchen cleaning up while Gideon worked on mending harness leather at the table. Thank you, he said suddenly. For what? For today. For standing up to Mercer. For... He stopped. For being here. I'm not going anywhere, Gideon. People say that a lot. Doesn't always make it true. I'm not people. He looked up at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them. Not attraction, neither of them had space for that, but understanding. Recognition. The acknowledgement that they were building something together that neither could manage alone. Outside, wind howled down from the mountains. Inside, the house was warm and the children were safe, and for one brief moment, survival didn't feel impossible. It just felt like tomorrow's problem. And tomorrow, they'd face together. The real cold arrived 3 weeks later, sweeping down from the peaks like something alive and vindictive. Temperatures dropped so fast that water left in buckets overnight turned to solid ice. The wind found every crack in the house, every gap in the barn walls, every weakness in their defenses against winter. And with the cold came the first real test of whether Black Hollow Ranch would survive until spring. Evelyn woke one morning to find frost coating the inside of her bedroom window. Her breath hung visible in the air, despite the fire Gideon kept burning downstairs all night. When she descended to the kitchen, she found him already awake, staring at something on the table with an expression that made her stomach tighten. What is it? He held up a letter. Bank notice? Mortgage payments due end of January. They're not extending the deadline. How much? More than we have. He set the letter down carefully, like it might explode. I was counting on spring cattle sales to cover it, but spring's 4 months away. Evelyn poured herself coffee, thinking, what are our options? Sell to Mercer, or lose everything when the bank forecloses. Those aren't options, those are surrenders. Sometimes surrender is the smart choice. You don't believe that. No, but I'm starting to wonder if believing something changes anything. He stood, pulling on his coat. I need to check the herd. We lost 2 calves yesterday, froze to death before I could get them to shelter. I'll come with you. You don't have to... Stop telling me what I don't have to do. They worked together through the morning, moving cattle to better shelter, breaking ice on water troughs, checking for signs of illness or injury. It was brutal work made worse by wind that cut through clothing like knives. By the time they returned to the house, Evelyn's hands were so numb she couldn't feel her fingers. Inside, chaos had erupted. Thomas and Marcus, the middle boys, 10 and 8, were shouting at each other while Nora tried to separate them. Grace was crying in the corner. Caleb had disappeared entirely. What happened? Evelyn demanded. Thomas took Marcus's book, Nora said, exasperated. Marcus hit him. Now they're both being idiots. I didn't take it, Thomas shouted. I borrowed it. You didn't ask. Because you never let me read your stuff. That's because you ruin everything you touch. Boys. Gideon's voice cut through the argument like a blade. Both of you. Outside. Wood detail. Now. But it's freezing. Then you'll work fast. Go. The boys fled. Nora slumped into a chair, looking exhausted. Grace continued crying softly. Evelyn knelt beside the little girl. Hey, what's wrong? I'm cold and I'm hungry and I want Mama. The words hung in the air. Want Mama. Like it was something that could be fixed with enough effort. Like grief was a problem that had solutions. Evelyn didn't have solutions. She just had arms. So she pulled Grace into a hug and let her cry, feeling the small body shake with sobs that were about more than cold and hunger. Where's Caleb? She asked Nora over Grace's head. Don't know. He was here an hour ago. Alarm spiked through Evelyn. You didn't notice him leave? I was dealing with Thomas and Marcus. I can't watch everyone at once. I'm not blaming you. I'm asking where he might have gone. Nora's defensive anger collapsed into worry. He likes the barn. Says the horses make him feel better. Evelyn passed Grace to Nora and headed for the door, ignoring Gideon's question about where she was going. Outside, the wind had picked up. Snow was starting to fall. Light for now, but the sky promised worse coming. She found Caleb in the barn, huddled in an empty stall with his arms wrapped around his knees, shaking with cold. "Caleb?" He looked up. His face was red, tear-streaked. "I didn't run away." "I know." She sat beside him, not touching, but close enough that he could feel her presence. "What happened?" "Thomas said Mama wouldn't recognize us anymore if she came back. He said we've changed too much, and she'd think we forgot about her." "Thomas is angry." "Angry people say stupid things." "But what if he's right?" Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. "Can I tell you something true? Your mama's not coming back, Caleb, and I'm not trying to replace her. Nobody could. But you haven't forgotten her. You won't forget her, and anyone who says different is wrong." "You promise?" "I promise." He leaned against her then, small and cold and trusting in a way that made her chest ache. She wrapped her coat around both of them and sat there while snow fell outside and the horses shifted in their stalls, and somewhere in the distance wolves howled. When they finally returned to the house, Gideon was waiting on the porch. He didn't ask questions, just nodded when Evelyn delivered Caleb to the warm kitchen and went to wash her face. That night, after the children were asleep, she found Gideon in the barn again, working by lantern light to repair a broken stall door. "You need to sleep," she said. "I need to keep this place from falling apart." "It's not going to fall apart in one night." "No, but every small thing I ignore becomes a big thing eventually, and we're drowning in big things already." Evelyn picked up a spare hammer and started working on the other side of the door. They fell into an easy rhythm, the kind that only comes from weeks of working alongside someone who doesn't need constant instruction or validation. "Mercer came by while you were looking for Caleb," Gideon said eventually. "What did he want?" "To remind me his offer expires end of the month. After that, he'll let the bank take everything and buy it at auction for half the price. So he's just trying to look generous before he screws you either way." "That's the read." "What did you tell him?" "I told him to leave before I did something we'd both regret." Despite everything, Evelyn smiled. "I'd have paid to see his face." "He didn't like it, but he left." Gideon set down his hammer. "Problem is, he's not wrong. I don't have the money for that payment, and I don't have a way to get it in 6 weeks. Then we find a way." "How?" "I don't know yet, but giving up means those kids lose their home, means everything you've built dies, and I refuse to accept that as inevitable." "Why do you care so much? You've been here 2 months. This isn't your fight." "It is my fight, because I'm here, and I'm invested, and those kids in that house trust me now. Walking away isn't an option." Gideon looked at her in the lamplight, something unreadable in his expression. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "Thank you." "Wasn't a compliment. I'm taking it as one anyway." The next morning brought worse news. Evelyn was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she heard horses approaching. Multiple riders. She moved to the window and felt her stomach drop. Mercer Crow. 3 of his ranch hands, all armed. Gideon appeared from upstairs, took one look at her face, and understood immediately. "Get the children to the cellar." "What? No!" "Evelyn, please." The look in his eyes convinced her. She gathered the children quickly, lying smoothly about needing help finding preserved apples in the cold cellar. Nora saw through it immediately, but herded the younger ones downstairs without argument. When Evelyn returned to the main floor, the riders were already dismounting outside. "Stay inside," Gideon said. "Not a chance." "Evelyn, we face this together or not at all. Choose." He didn't have time to argue. Mercer was already climbing the porch steps, his men flanking him like a show of force. Gideon stepped outside to meet them. Evelyn followed, positioning herself slightly behind but clearly present. "Mercer, what do you want?" "Just checking on my future property." Mercer smiled that cold smile. "Heard you had some cattle losses this week. Shame. Every head counts when you're barely holding on." "Get to the point." "Point is simple. I'm tired of waiting for you to accept reality. So I'm making a new offer. I buy the whole ranch. Now. Fair price. You and your kids relocate before winter gets worse." "Not interested." "You should be, because I've had surveyors confirm what I suspected. Your northern boundary encroaches on my water rights by about 50 yards. That's illegal." Gideon went very still. "That boundary's been unchanged for 15 years. 15 years of illegal usage. I could sue." Have the whole ranch seized, but I'm a reasonable man. Sell to me now. This all goes away clean. You're lying. Am I? Want to bet your children's future on that? Mercer's smile widened. See, the thing about desperate men is they make stupid bets, and you're about as desperate as they come. One of Mercer's men, a thick-necked brute with cruel eyes, spat tobacco juice onto the porch, deliberately disrespectful, testing boundaries. Evelyn spoke before Gideon could respond. You've delivered your message. Now leave. Mercer's attention shifted to her. Didn't realize the help got a say in business matters. I'm not the help. I'm a partner. And I'm telling you to leave. Partner. Mercer laughed. That what you call it? I heard different. Heard you're just the latest desperate woman playing house with a broke widower. Call me whatever makes you feel important. Doesn't change the fact that you're trespassing. Trespassing on property that'll be mine in 6 weeks anyway. He stepped closer. Let me give you some advice, Miss Rowe. Women like you, women without protection, without prospects, they don't survive places like this. They get used up and thrown away. Smart ones leave while they still can. Lucky I'm not smart then. Something dangerous flashed in Mercer's eyes. He opened his mouth to respond, but Gideon moved between them, his voice low and absolutely controlled. You've made your offer. It's declined. Now get off my property before I demonstrate exactly how desperate I am. For a moment, Evelyn thought Mercer would push, thought this would turn violent. The men behind him were clearly ready for it, hands drifting toward weapons, postures shifting. Then Mercer smiled again and stepped back. 6 weeks, Vale. Then we'll see who's desperate. He mounted his horse with easy confidence. Enjoy your last winter here. They watched the riders disappear down the trail. Neither spoke until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. That was stupid, Gideon said quietly. Confronting him like that. He was threatening you. He's been threatening me for months. You engaging just makes you a target too. Maybe I want to be a target. Maybe I'm tired of watching good people get pushed around by men like him. Men like him are dangerous, Evelyn. This isn't some territorial pissing match. He has money, power, and no morals. That's a bad combination. Then we need to be smarter. How? He's got lawyers and surveyors and enough money to tie us up in court until we're bankrupt anyway. Evelyn was quiet, thinking. His claim about the boundary, is there any truth to it? I don't know, maybe. Property lines up here were drawn rough when the territory was first surveyed, but we've operated on these boundaries for years without complaint. Until now, until he needs a legal justification to force you out. She turned to face him. We need to find the original survey documents, prove he's lying. Those would be filed in the Territorial Land Office, 3 days' ride south. Then that's where we go. Evelyn, I can't leave for 3 days, not in this weather, not with the children. Then I go alone. Absolutely not. Why? Because I'm a woman? Because it's dangerous. Because the trails are barely passable. Because if something happens to you out there, nobody will find you until spring. If we don't prove he's lying, we lose everything anyway. That's guaranteed. At least this gives us a chance. Gideon stared at her. You're serious. Completely. You'd risk your life for a property you don't even own. I'm risking my life for a family I do belong to. There's a difference. Something broke in Gideon's expression then, not anger or frustration, something softer and more complicated. I can't ask you to do this. You're not asking, I'm volunteering. Why? Because someone has to. And right now, I'm the only one who can leave without this place collapsing. She touched his arm briefly. Trust me, I'm harder to kill than I look. The children emerged from the cellar once Evelyn gave the all clear. Nora immediately demanded to know what happened. Evelyn gave her an edited version. Territorial dispute, legal questions, boring adult problems. Nora didn't buy it, but she didn't push. She'd learned that sometimes survival meant not asking questions you weren't ready to hear answered. That evening, Evelyn prepared for the journey south. She packed light, bedroll, dried food, ammunition, what little money remained. Gideon tried one more time to talk her out of it over supper. The weather's getting worse. Storms coming in from the north. Then I leave before it hits. If you get caught in the open, I won't. You don't know that. No, but I know staying here means watching you lose everything without fighting back. And I'd rather risk a storm than live with that. Caleb started crying. I don't want you to go. Evelyn knelt beside his chair. I'm coming back. You promise? I promise. But the other ladies, I'm not the other ladies, remember? She squeezed his hand. I keep my promises. Always. Later, after the children were in bed, Evelyn stood in the kitchen going over maps with Gideon. He'd marked the safest route south, noting potential shelter points and dangerous sections. If the storm catches you, he said, there's an abandoned trapper's cabin here. He pointed to a spot on the map. It's rough, but it'll keep you alive if you can reach it. I'll reach it if needed. Evelyn, he stopped, started again. I shouldn't have let you do this. You're not letting me. I'm choosing. Still feels wrong, sending you into danger while I stay safe here. You're not safe here. You're managing 5 children and a dying ranch in the middle of winter. That's its own kind of danger. She folded the map. We both have our battles. Mine just involves more riding. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. When you come back. When I come back, we'll figure out the next problem. That's the deal. That's the deal, he echoed. She left before dawn the next morning, slipping out of the house while everyone still slept. The gray mare was already saddled, breath steaming in the freezing air. Gideon stood beside the horse, checking the saddle straps one more time. You sure about this? He asked. Too late to change my mind now. It's never too late. It is for me. She mounted, settling into the saddle with practiced ease. Keep everyone alive while I'm gone. That's the plan. And Gideon? Don't let Mercer back on this property. Whatever he threatens, whatever he promises, don't engage. Understood. She kicked the mare into motion, riding toward the southern trail as the sky lightened from black to gray. Behind her, Black Hollow Ranch grew smaller. Ahead, the mountains waited, vast and indifferent and deadly. The first day passed without incident. The trail was rough but navigable, winding through dense forest and across frozen streams. Evelyn made good time, pushing hard while the weather held. By nightfall, she'd covered nearly 30 miles. She camped that night in a natural shelter formed by an overhanging rock face, building a small fire and eating dried meat while the temperature dropped. The mare stood close, sharing warmth. Somewhere in the darkness, something large moved through the trees. Evelyn checked her rifle and tried not to think about how alone she was. The second day brought the storm. It started as light snow around midday. Within 2 hours, it had become a full blizzard, wind screaming through the trees, snow falling so thick she could barely see the trail ahead. The temperature plummeted. Ice formed on the mare's mane, on Evelyn's coat, on the exposed skin of her face. She pushed forward anyway, knowing that stopping meant freezing. By late afternoon, she'd lost the trail entirely. Everything looked the same, white and howling and hostile. The mare stumbled through drifts that reached her chest. Evelyn's hands were so cold she'd lost feeling in her fingers. She was going to die out here. That thought arrived with surprising clarity. No panic, just understanding. She'd gambled and lost. This was how it ended, frozen on a mountain, trying to save a family that wasn't even hers. Then she saw it, a structure. Dark wood barely visible through the storm. The trapper's cabin Gideon had marked on the map. Evelyn urged the mare forward with what remained of her strength, reached the cabin door, fell more than climbed from the saddle. Her legs buckled when she hit the ground. She had to crawl the last few feet to the door, her frozen hands clumsy on the latch. Inside was dark and freezing, but it was shelter. 4 walls and a roof. Enough. She managed to get the mare inside too, crowding them both into the single-room structure. Found wood stacked against one wall, probably left by the last person to use the cabin. Her hand shook so badly she could barely strike a match, but eventually she coaxed fire from the wood. Heat. Slow at first, then building. Evelyn huddled near the flames, shaking with cold that went bone deep. The mare pressed close, sharing what warmth she had. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, they survived. She stayed in the cabin for 2 days while the storm passed. On the third morning, she woke to silence. The kind of heavy, absolute silence that comes after a blizzard. She opened the door to a world transformed. Snow piled in drifts higher than her head, the trail completely buried, trees bent under the weight of ice. But the sky was clear, brittle blue, beautiful and merciless. Evelyn saddled the mare and continued south. She reached the territorial land office late on the 5th day, a squat building in a settlement barely larger than Black Hollow, staffed by a bored clerk who looked surprised anyone had traveled in such weather. "I need to see survey records," Evelyn said. "Black Hollow Ridge area, northern boundaries." "That'll take time to pull from archives." "How much time?" "Day or two." "I'll wait." She spent those 2 days in a boarding house, sleeping in a real bed for the first time in months, eating hot meals, recovering from the journey. But she didn't relax. Couldn't. Not when everything depended on what those records showed. On the afternoon of the 2nd day, the clerk sent word that the documents were ready. Evelyn studied them carefully, comparing the original survey marks to her memory of the ranch's current boundaries. It took less than 10 minutes to find what she needed. Mercer Crow was lying. The original survey clearly showed the ranch's northern boundary where it currently stood. There was no encroachment, no illegality. Just a powerful man fabricating a legal claim to steal land he wanted. "I need certified copies of these," Evelyn told the clerk. "That'll cost—" "I don't care what it costs. How fast can you prepare them?" "Tomorrow morning." "I'll be here." She collected the documents at first light and began the journey back. The return trip was faster. No storm, better conditions, and the desperate need to get these papers to Gideon before Mercer made another move. She rode 12 hours straight, stopping only to rest the mare and eat. By the 2nd day, her body was screaming from the punishment, but she pushed through. Black Hollow Ranch had become home. Those children had become her family. Failure wasn't acceptable. She reached the ranch on the evening of the 8th day, riding up the trail in twilight to find lanterns burning in every window. Before she could dismount, the door burst open and children poured out. Caleb first, then Grace, then Thomas and Marcus, all shouting and crying with relief. Gideon emerged last, moving more slowly, his expression tight, with something that looked like restrained emotion. "You came back," Caleb said, wrapped around Evelyn's leg like he'd never let go. "Told you I would." Nora stood on the porch, arms crossed, but even she looked relieved. "You're an idiot," she said. "Probably. We thought you died in the storm." "Takes more than a storm to kill me." Gideon helped her dismount, his hands steadying her when her legs threatened to collapse. "You got the documents?" "Every page, certified and stamped." She pulled the leather folder from her saddlebag. "He's lying. The boundary is exactly where it should be, always has been." Something like hope flickered across Gideon's face. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. He was gambling we wouldn't check, that we'd just accept his claim as truth. We need to—" "Tomorrow," Evelyn interrupted. "Tonight I need food and sleep and to stop moving for 12 consecutive hours." He laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was startling and warm. "Deal." The children insisted she eat with them, piling the table with food like she'd been gone months instead of days. They talked over each other, telling stories about what happened while she was away, minor disasters, small victories, the everyday chaos of survival. Evelyn listened and ate and felt something dangerous and beautiful settling in her chest. This was family, not the one she'd imagined as a girl, not the one she'd mourned when the doctor delivered his diagnosis, but real and messy and present. Later, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, she found Gideon on the porch, staring out at the snow-covered mountains. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Too much to think about." He glanced at her. "You should be resting." "Should be. But here I am." They stood in companionable silence for a moment. "I thought you weren't coming back," Gideon said quietly. "When the storm hit and you were 3 days overdue, I thought—" "That I died?" "Yeah." "Would have complicated your staffing situation." "That's not—" He stopped. "I wasn't worried about staffing." "No?" "No." The word hung between them, heavy with meanings neither was ready to examine. "Well," Evelyn said, "I'm here. Storm didn't get me. Neither did the cold or the wolves or the 5-day ride through hell." She smiled slightly. "Turns out I'm persistent." "That's one word for it." "What's another?" "Reckless, stubborn, brave." He met her eyes. "Essential." Evelyn's breath caught. "Gideon, I know, wrong time, wrong everything, but you need to know, those kids in that house, they're not the only ones who need you here." Before she could respond, the door opened and Caleb appeared, rubbing his eyes. "Can't sleep." he mumbled. The moment broke. Evelyn lifted the boy easily, settling him on her hip. Come on, I'll sit with you. As she carried him inside, she glanced back once at Gideon. He was still watching her, and the look on his face made her wonder if surviving winter was going to be the easy part. The certified documents gave them leverage, but leverage only mattered if they could use it before Mercer made his next move. That next move came faster than either of them expected. 2 days after Evelyn's return, a rider arrived with a summons to appear before the Territorial Land Commission. Mercer had filed a formal complaint about the boundary dispute and demanded immediate resolution. The hearing was set for 10 days out. He's forcing this to a head, Gideon said, reading the summons for the third time. Wants it settled before mortgage payment is due. Because if the boundary dispute is unresolved, the bank won't extend credit, Evelyn finished. Smart. Corners you either way. We have the survey documents. That should be enough. Should be. But territorial land commissioners aren't known for caring about small ranchers over wealthy ones, especially when the wealthy one probably has them in his pocket. Gideon set the summons down heavily. So we're fighting a rigged game. Most games are rigged. You just have to find the angle they didn't anticipate. What angle? Evelyn was quiet, thinking. Mercer's betting on intimidation and legal maneuvering. He thinks we'll show up with documents and good intentions, and he'll bury us in technicalities. And we don't just bring documents. We bring witnesses. Other ranchers he's done this to. Make it about a pattern of land theft, not one disputed boundary. Nobody's going to testify against Mercer Crowe. He'll destroy them. Then we find the ones he's already destroyed, the ones who have nothing left to lose. Over the next week, Evelyn traveled to neighboring settlements while Gideon managed the ranch. She visited failed homesteads, talked to widows living in boarding houses, tracked down former ranch hands who'd seen too much and been run off for knowing it. What she found was worse than she'd imagined. Mercer Crowe had been systematically driving out smaller ranchers for years, cutting fences, poisoning water sources, bribing land office clerks to misfile documents, hiring thugs to intimidate families until they sold cheap and left. A dozen operations had failed under suspicious circumstances. 5 families had lost everything. 2 men had died, one in a mysterious barn fire, one from injuries sustained when his horse allegedly spooked and threw him off a cliff. Nobody could prove Mercer was responsible, but everyone knew. The problem was getting them to say so publicly. Evelyn spent 3 days convincing a widow named Martha Collins to testify. The woman's husband had drowned in what was ruled an accident after refusing to sell his water rights. She lived now in a single room above a saloon, working as a seamstress, all her dreams buried with her husband. Why would I testify? Martha asked bitterly. What's it change? John's still dead. The ranch is still gone. It changes whether Mercer gets to keep doing this to other families. Other families aren't my problem. No, but revenge could be. Evelyn leaned forward. You want to hurt the man who took everything from you. This is how. Stand up in front of the commission and tell them what really happened. Make him sweat for once. Something flickered in Martha's eyes. They won't believe me. They might if you're not the only one talking. You got others? Working on it. By the time the hearing arrived, Evelyn had assembled 5 witnesses, people Mercer had crushed, who were willing to risk his retaliation for a chance to expose him. It wasn't many, but it was enough to establish a pattern. The hearing was held in Black Hollow Settlement's largest building, which wasn't saying much. A single room with rough benches, a table for the commissioners, and standing room that filled quickly with spectators drawn by gossip about the confrontation. Mercer arrived with 2 lawyers and an air of absolute confidence. He barely glanced at Gideon and Evelyn as he took his seat. The lead commissioner, a thin man named Hewitt with bureaucrat's eyes, called the session to order. We're here to resolve a boundary dispute between Mercer Crowe and Gideon Vale regarding property along Black Hollow Ridge. Mr. Crowe, present your complaint. Crowe, present. Mercer's lead lawyer stood smooth and practiced. Commissioner, the facts are simple. Survey records from 15 years ago show clear boundary markers that Mr. Vale has violated by approximately 50 yards. This encroachment includes valuable water access that rightfully belongs to my client. We're asking the Commission to enforce the original survey and compensate Mr. Crowe for years of illegal usage. Mr. Vale, your response? Gideon stood less comfortable with formal proceedings but steady. The boundaries we operate on have been unchanged since my father homesteaded this land 20 years ago. We've never encroached on anyone's property. This complaint is false and intended to force me off land Mr. Crow wants to acquire." "Strong accusation," Commissioner Hewitt said dryly. "You have evidence." Evelyn stood. "We do." Hewitt looked surprised. "And you are?" "Evelyn Rowe. I work at Black Hollow Ranch, and I traveled to the Territorial Land Office to retrieve the original certified survey documents." She placed the folder on the table. "These show conclusively that the current boundaries are correct and legal. Mr. Crow's claim is baseless." Mercer's lawyer barely glanced at the documents. "These surveys are old and potentially inaccurate. The territory has since conducted more precise measurements." "Then produce those measurements," Evelyn said. "They're being processed through proper channels." "They don't exist," Evelyn interrupted. "Because there haven't been any new surveys. You're inventing claims and hoping we wouldn't check." "That's absurd." "Is it? Because this isn't the first time Mr. Crow has used boundary disputes to steal land from struggling ranchers." The room went silent. Commissioner Hewitt leaned forward. "That's a serious allegation, Miss Rowe." "I have serious evidence." She gestured to the witnesses seated near the back. 5 people prepared to testify about similar tactics Mr. Crow used against their families: fabricated boundary disputes, mysterious accidents, intimidation, all following the same pattern we're seeing with the Vale Ranch. Mercer stood abruptly. "This is character assassination. These people are disgruntled former neighbors with grudges." "These people are victims of fraud," Evelyn shot back, "and you're terrified they're finally going to be heard." "Commissioner, I object to this circus." "Sit down, Mr. Crow." Hewitt's voice carried unexpected steel. "I'll determine what's relevant to these proceedings." He looked at Evelyn. "Call your first witness." Martha Collins testified first, her voice shaking but clear. She described how Mercer had made repeated offers to buy their ranch at insulting prices. How after her husband refused, their cattle started dying from poisoned water. How her husband had drowned under circumstances that were ruled accidental but felt wrong. How Mercer bought the ranch at auction 3 months later for a fraction of its value. By the time she finished, the room was riveted. The next witness was a former ranch hand who'd worked for one of Mercer's competitors. He testified about being ordered to cut fences and drive cattle onto neighboring properties, creating disputes Mercer could exploit. When he'd refused to participate further, he'd been beaten and run out of the territory. The third witness described losing her family's homestead after a barn fire that killed their livestock. The fire had started under suspicious circumstances. 2 days earlier, Mercer had made his final purchase offer. 2 weeks later, he owned the land. With each testimony, the pattern became undeniable. Mercer's lawyers tried to discredit the witnesses, questioning their memories, their motives, their reliability. But the stories were too consistent, too specific, too obviously true. When the last witness finished, Commissioner Hewitt called a recess. "We'll reconvene in 2 hours with a decision." Outside, Gideon grabbed Evelyn's arm, pulling her aside. I don't even have words." "Don't celebrate yet. Commissioners can still rule against us if Mercer's paid them enough." "Even after hearing all that?" "Money talks louder than testimony. We'll see." They waited in the cold, watching spectators mill around discussing what they'd witnessed. Several people approached to shake Gideon's hand or offer Evelyn quiet words of support. The tide of public opinion had clearly shifted. But public opinion didn't make official rulings. When they reconvened, Commissioner Hewitt's expression was unreadable. "This commission has reviewed the evidence presented by both parties. The original survey documents provided by Miss Rowe are clear and certified. They show no boundary violation by Mr. Vale. Additionally, the testimony regarding Mr. Crow's pattern of behavior, while not directly relevant to the specific boundary dispute, raises serious concerns that warrant separate investigation by territorial authorities." Mercer's face went dark red. "Therefore," Hewitt continued, "this commission rules in favor of Gideon Vale. The boundary complaint is dismissed. Furthermore, Mr. Crow, consider yourself on notice that any future complaints you file will receive extraordinary scrutiny." The room erupted. Spectators cheered. Mercer's lawyers looked stunned. Mercer himself sat frozen, his carefully constructed power play demolished in front of half the territory. Gideon stood slowly, like he couldn't quite believe what had happened. Evelyn felt tension she'd been carrying for weeks finally released from her shoulders. They'd won. Outside, Martha Collins approached Evelyn with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. I thought nobody would ever hold him accountable." "This isn't full accountability, but it's a start. It's more than I had yesterday." Other witnesses echoed similar sentiments. For people who'd been crushed and forgotten, being heard mattered almost as much as winning. The ride back to Black Hollow Ranch was quiet. Gideon seemed lost in thought. Evelyn was too exhausted to make conversation. They'd won the battle, but the war wasn't over. The mortgage payment was still due in 3 weeks, and they still didn't have the money. When they reached the ranch, the children poured out to greet them. Nora stood on the porch, arms crossed, trying to look casual. "Well?" she demanded. "We won," Gideon said. The children erupted in celebration, though the younger ones clearly didn't fully understand what had been won. They just knew their father looked relieved for the first time in months. That night, after the children were asleep, Evelyn found herself back on the porch, despite the cold. She'd developed a habit of standing there when her mind was too busy for sleep, watching the mountains and the stars and the vast, indifferent wilderness. Gideon joined her without speaking, 2 mugs of coffee in his hands. He offered one. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "Too much happening." "We won. We won one fight. The bigger one's still coming. The mortgage payment." "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking, maybe it's time to accept reality. Even with Mercer blocked, I don't have the money. Come February, the bank takes the ranch anyway." "So that's it? You're giving up?" "I'm being practical." "No, you're being scared. There's a difference." "Scared of what?" "Scared of believing things could actually work out. Scared that if you hope and then fail, it'll hurt worse than just surrendering now." Gideon stared into his coffee. "Maybe." "Definitely." Evelyn turned to face him. "You've been surviving for 2 years on the assumption that everything's temporary. That loss is inevitable. But what if it's not? What if we actually pull this off? How? I've looked at the numbers 100 times. Even selling every asset we can spare, I'm $200 short. That's not a gap we can bridge in 3 weeks. Then we find another way." "There is no other way." "There's always another way." She set down her coffee. "What assets haven't you considered?" "I've considered everything. The land itself, but I can't sell parcels without the bank's approval, and that takes months. The cattle herd, but it's winter and nobody's buying. Equipment, but it's all essential for spring operations." "What about your timber rights?" Gideon paused. "What?" "You've got forest on the north section, dense pine. Logging companies pay for timber rights, don't they?" "Yeah, but those contracts take time to negotiate, unless someone's desperate for timber and willing to pay premium for quick access." Evelyn's mind was racing. "There's a railroad expansion happening south of here. I saw the camps when I went to the land office. They're burning through lumber faster than local mills can supply." "You think they'd pay enough?" "I think it's worth finding out." The next morning, Gideon rode south to meet with the railroad company's timber acquisition agent. He was gone 4 days. When he returned, his expression was carefully neutral until he reached the porch and allowed himself a small smile. "They're interested. Very interested." "How interested?" $300 interested. For timber rights to the North Forest section, immediate cutting privileges. Evelyn felt something break loose in her chest. "That's more than enough." "It's exactly enough. Payment plus a cushion for next season's operating costs." The children had gathered, sensing something important. "What does this mean?" Nora asked. "It means we're keeping the ranch," Gideon said. "It means we're staying." Caleb whooped. Grace started crying happy tears. Thomas and Marcus started wrestling in celebration. Even Nora allowed herself a real smile. That night felt different. Lighter. Like the weight that had been pressing down on all of them had finally lifted enough to breathe. But Evelyn knew better than to assume the danger was past. Men like Mercer Crowe didn't accept defeat gracefully. They waited for opportunities to strike back. That opportunity came a week later. Evelyn was in the barn tending to a sick calf when she heard horses, multiple riders. She moved to the door and felt ice run down her spine. Mercer Crowe, 6 armed men, coming fast. She ran for the house, shouting for Gideon. He emerged with his rifle, face grim. "Get the children inside, bar the doors." "What are you—" "Just do it." Evelyn herded the children inside, her heart hammering. Through the window, she watched Mercer and his men surround the house. This wasn't a social visit. This was an attack. "Gideon Vale," Mercer's voice carried across the yard. "You humiliated me, cost me money, made me look weak in front of the whole territory." "You did that yourself," Gideon called back. "I'm here to collect payment for that mistake. There's nothing here worth taking." "Oh, I think there is." Mercer's smile was visible even at a distance. "That woman you've got working here, Evelyn Rowe, she's the one who really cost me. So here's the deal. She leaves with me right now, and I forget about all this unpleasantness." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "That's not happening," Gideon said, his voice deadly calm. "Then we have a problem, because I'm not leaving without something to show for this trip. Either she comes out willingly, or we come in and get her." "You threatening violence on my property?" "I'm explaining consequences. Your choice how this plays out." Gideon raised his rifle. "Here's my choice. You leave now, or we find out how many of you are willing to die for Mercer Crow's wounded pride." Several of Mercer's men shifted uncomfortably. They'd been hired for intimidation, not a firefight with a desperate man defending his home. "You can't shoot all of us," Mercer said. "No, but I'll start with you." "And I don't miss." The standoff stretched. Evelyn could see Nora herding the younger children to the back rooms, could feel the tension building toward violence. Then a voice called from the trail. "What's going on here?" Martha Collins rode into view, followed by two of the other witnesses from the hearing. Then 3 more riders appeared from another direction, ranchers Evelyn had spoken to during her investigation. "Saw Crow and his men heading this way," Martha called to Gideon. "Figured you might need some support." More riders appeared. Within minutes, a dozen people had positioned themselves around the property, not close enough to threaten, but present enough to witness whatever happened next. Mercer's confidence wavered. "This doesn't concern any of you." "It concerns all of us," Martha said. "You've been terrorizing this territory for years. It ends today." "You can't prove—" "We already proved it, at the hearing, in front of the commissioner." She looked at the men riding with Mercer. "You boys getting paid enough to commit assault with a dozen witnesses watching? Because that's what this is about to be." One by one, Mercer's hired guns backed their horses away. They'd signed up for intimidation, not public criminal charges. Mercer sat alone, surrounded by people who'd once feared him and now stared him down with collective fury. "This isn't over," he said to Gideon. "Yeah, it is." Gideon's rifle hadn't moved. "Leave. Don't come back. Next time I see you on my property, I won't bother with warnings." Mercer wheeled his horse and rode off, his remaining men following. The assembled crowd watched until they disappeared, then slowly began to disperse. Martha lingered long enough to catch Evelyn's eye through the window and nod. When the last rider left, Evelyn emerged from the house on shaking legs. Gideon lowered his rifle finally, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "That was too close," he said, "but it worked. They came. Because of you, because you gave them a reason to stop being afraid." He looked at her. "You changed something here, Evelyn. Not just for us, for everyone. I just connected people who needed connecting. No, you gave them courage. That's different." The children spilled out of the house, Caleb immediately attaching himself to Evelyn's leg. Nora stood apart, watching with an expression that was complicated and new. "You didn't leave," the girl said quietly. "Of course not. He was going to take you. You could have gone, avoided the whole fight." "And leave you? Leave all of you?" Evelyn shook her head. "Not a chance." Something broke in Nora's careful defenses. "I was wrong about you." "About what?" "I thought you'd leave like everyone else. Thought you were just here until something better came along." She swallowed hard. "But you're not, are you? You're actually staying." "I'm actually staying." "Why?" "Because this is home now. Your family now. And family doesn't abandon each other when things get hard." Nora nodded once, then turned and walked back into the house before anyone could see her cry. That evening, Gideon made the payment to the railroad company official. The money went straight to the bank the next morning. The mortgage was paid. Black Hollow Ranch was secure for another year. The ranch, the family, the future. All of it had been saved by a woman who'd arrived believing she'd never have a family of her own. But as Evelyn stood in the kitchen that night, watching Gideon help Caleb with arithmetic, while Grace drew pictures at the table and Nora corrected Thomas's reading, She realized something profound had shifted. She hadn't saved this family. They'd saved each other. Winter still gripped the mountains. Spring was months away. The ranch still needed constant work. The children still struggled with grief and adjustment. Nothing was perfect or easy. But they were together. And somehow, that was enough. Gideon caught her eye across the table and smiled. Not the exhausted, desperate smile of a man drowning, a real smile. The kind that reached his eyes and suggested he might actually believe in futures again. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Nothing important." Liar. "Fine. I was thinking this place isn't so bad. High praise from a woman who rode through a blizzard to save it. Someone had to." "Yeah, someone did." The moment stretched between them, full of things neither was quite ready to say. Then Caleb spilled his milk and Grace started laughing and the spell broke into the beautiful chaos of normal family life. Later, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Evelyn stood on the porch one more time. Tomorrow would bring new problems. Next week would bring new challenges. Winter would eventually give way to spring, and then they'd face whatever came next. But tonight, standing in the cold with mountains rising black against the stars, Evelyn allowed herself to believe something she'd stopped believing years ago. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. And for the first time in her life, that was enough. Winter loosened its grip slowly, reluctantly, like a predator that had fed well and wasn't quite ready to release its prey. February brought temperature swings that turned snow to slush during the day and refroze it into treacherous ice at night. March arrived with freezing rain that coated everything in crystal and made even simple chores dangerous. But spring was coming. Everyone could feel it in the angle of sunlight, the behavior of animals, the way the air tasted different at dawn. The ranch had survived. Against odds that should have crushed them, Black Hollow had made it through the killing season intact. That should have been enough. But Evelyn woke one morning in early March to the sound of Caleb coughing. Not the normal winter cough of a child with a cold. Something deeper, wetter. The kind of cough that turned her blood cold because she'd heard it before. 2 years ago, that cough had taken their mother. She found Gideon already in Caleb's room, hand on the boy's forehead, face tight with barely controlled fear. "How long has he been like this?" Evelyn asked. "Started yesterday. I thought it was nothing, but overnight..." He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Caleb's fever was high enough that Evelyn could feel the heat radiating from him without touching. His breathing was labored, each inhale a struggle. His eyes were glassy with illness. "We need the doctor," she said. "Roads are still half frozen. It's a full day's ride each direction." "Then one of us goes now." "Evelyn, don't argue. Every hour we wait makes this worse." She was already moving, grabbing her coat. "Keep him cool. Force fluids. I'll be back as fast as I can." "Wait," Gideon caught her arm. "Last time someone rode for the doctor in winter weather?" "I know, your wife didn't make it back, but I'm not her. And I'm not staying here watching him die because we were too scared to try." The look on his face nearly broke her. This was a man who'd already lost too much, who'd spent 2 years believing that any happiness was temporary, any security was illusion. "Come back," he said quietly. "That's the plan." She left before he could argue further, saddling the gray mare with hands that moved fast despite the cold. Nora appeared in the barn doorway as Evelyn was checking the saddle straps. "Is he going to die?" the girl asked bluntly. "Not if I can help it." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." Evelyn mounted. "Take care of your father while I'm gone. He's going to try to hold it together for the little ones, but he's terrified. Don't let him be alone with that." Nora nodded once, understanding more than a 14-year-old should have to. The ride to the nearest doctor, a rough frontier physician in a settlement called Cooper's Bend, was brutal. The trail was treacherous with ice and mud. Twice the mare nearly fell. Once, Evelyn had to dismount and lead the horse across a section where the path had partially washed out, leaving a narrow strip between the mountain and a drop that disappeared into morning fog. She reached Cooper's Bend by late afternoon, found the doctor's office, and nearly collapsed from exhaustion and adrenaline when he agreed to come immediately. Dr. Weber was an old man, weathered by decades on the frontier, but his hands were steady and his eyes were sharp. He asked good questions on the ride back. What were the symptoms? When did they start? Any recent illness in the household? They reached Black Hollow Ranch after dark, the house glowing with lamplight like a beacon in the wilderness. Gideon met them at the door, his relief at seeing Evelyn visible for just a moment before professionalism took over. "He's worse," was all Gideon said. Dr. Weber examined Caleb thoroughly while the family waited downstairs in tense silence. Grace clung to Evelyn. Thomas and Marcus sat stone still, trying to be brave. Nora stood by the window, arms crossed, staring at nothing. When the doctor finally descended, his expression was carefully neutral. "It's pneumonia. Early stage, but it'll get worse before it gets better. The next 3 days are critical. He needs constant care, cool cloths to manage the fever, fluids forced regularly, and these medicines administered exactly as I've written down." He handed Evelyn a paper with detailed instructions. "If the fever spikes above a certain point or his breathing becomes more labored, someone needs to come get me immediately. Understood?" "Understood," Evelyn said. "I'll check back in 2 days if the weather holds. Meanwhile, keep him comfortable and don't let him get dehydrated. That's what kills most pneumonia patients. The body just runs out of resources to fight." After the doctor left, Evelyn organized the household into shifts. She and Gideon would alternate sitting with Caleb through the night. Nora would manage the younger children and basic household tasks. Everyone had a role. Everyone had a purpose, because the alternative was sitting still while panic consumed them. The first night was the worst. Caleb's fever climbed despite their efforts. He thrashed in fevered dreams, calling for his mother, crying out at visions only he could see. Evelyn sat beside his bed with cool cloths and medicine and prayers to any force that might be listening, even though she'd stopped believing years ago that anyone was. Around 3 in the morning, Gideon relieved her. She should have slept, but instead found herself sitting in the kitchen, staring at nothing, running through scenarios where they'd done things differently, where they'd caught the illness earlier, where she'd ridden faster, where the outcome was different. Nora found her there. "You should rest," the girl said. "So should you." "Can't." Nora sat down across from her. "Every time I close my eyes, I see—" She stopped. "I remember when Mama got sick, how fast it happened, how powerless everyone was. This is different." "How?" "Because we caught it earlier, because the doctor's been here, because Caleb is young and strong and he's going to fight this." "You can't know that." "No, but I can believe it, and sometimes that's enough." Nora was quiet for a long time. "You really think he'll be okay?" "I think we're doing everything we can. The rest is up to him." "I hate that. The not knowing. The waiting. Everyone does. But it's part of being human. We don't get certainty. We just get moments and choices and the hope that we're making the right ones." Nora looked at her then, really looked at her. "You sound like a mother." The words hit harder than they should have. "I'm not." "Yeah, you are. Maybe not the way you expected, but you are." Nora's voice cracked slightly. "When Mama died, I thought that was it. Thought we'd just have to grow up fast and figure everything out ourselves. But then you came. And you didn't try to replace her. You showed up every day, even when we made it hard, especially when we made it hard. Don't say it's just what anyone would do, because it's not. The other women who came here, they lasted days. You lasted through winter, through Mercer, through all of it. That's not normal. She wiped her eyes roughly. "That's what mothers do." Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest. All the walls she'd built to protect herself from hoping for too much, wanting too much, believing she deserved more than utility, they crumbled in the face of this fierce, damaged girl calling her mother. "I love you," Evelyn said quietly. "All of you. I need you to know that." "We know." Nora stood. "We've known for a while. We were just waiting for you to figure it out." Before Evelyn could respond, Gideon appeared in the doorway. His fever broke. He's sleeping normal now, breathing easier. The relief was so intense it was almost painful. Over the next 2 days, Caleb improved steadily. The fever stayed down. The cough loosened. Color returned to his face. By the time Dr. Weber returned for his follow-up visit, the boy was sitting up and demanding stories. "Tell me about when you rode through the blizzard," Caleb said to Evelyn, his voice still raspy but stronger. "You've heard that story a dozen times. I want to hear it again, the part where you almost died but didn't." "That's a morbid thing to request from someone recovering from pneumonia," But you didn't die. That's the important part. You could have, but you didn't because you're stubborn. That's one interpretation. It's the right interpretation. Caleb coughed, then settled back against his pillows. Thomas says you're magic. Says normal people don't survive the things you survive. Thomas is dramatic. Is he wrong, though? Evelyn smiled despite herself. I'm not magic, I'm just too stubborn to quit. See? That's what I said. Dr. Weber finished his examination and pronounced Caleb well on his way to recovery. Someone did excellent work here. Most frontier families would have lost a child this sick. You saved his life. Evelyn saved his life, Gideon corrected. She rode through hell to get you, then didn't sleep for 3 days, keeping him stable. Team effort, Evelyn said, embarrassed by the attention. Whatever you call it, it worked. Dr. Weber packed his bag. He'll need another week of rest and light activity, but barring complications, he'll make a full recovery. After the doctor left, the house felt different, lighter, like a weight they'd all been carrying had finally lifted. That evening, the children insisted on eating dinner together in Caleb's room, a chaotic affair involving spilled soup and too many people crowded into a small space. But the laughter was real. The relief was palpable. For the first time in days, they could breathe without fear crushing their lungs. Later, Gideon found Evelyn in the barn, brushing down the mare who'd carried her to Cooper's Bend and back. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For not giving up. For riding when I was too paralyzed with fear to act. For saving my son. Our son, Evelyn corrected softly, then stopped, realizing what she'd said. I mean, no, you're right, he is ours. They all are. Gideon stepped closer. I've been trying to figure out how to say this for weeks, months maybe, but the words never feel adequate. Say what? That you're not just help anymore. You're not a partner or an employee or any of the safe words I've been hiding behind. You're family. And more than that, He stopped, searching for the right words. You're the reason this family still exists, the reason I still exist. Evelyn's throat tightened. Gideon, let me finish, please. He took a breath. When Sarah died, I thought that was it, that I'd had my chance at happiness and lost it, and the rest of my life was just surviving for the kids' sake. But then you showed up, and you were prickly and stubborn, and you nearly died chasing a cow, and somewhere along the way I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. We all were. Because of you. That's not fair. You give me too much credit. I don't give you enough. None of us do. His voice was rough with emotion. You rode through a blizzard when you'd been here less than a month. You faced down Mercer Crow and won. You assembled an entire community to stand with us. You just saved Caleb's life by refusing to accept that some things are inevitable. And through all of it, you kept saying you were just being practical, just being useful. I was. No. You were being extraordinary. And I've been too scared to acknowledge that because acknowledging it means admitting how much I need you, how much we all need you, how terrifying it would be if you ever left. I'm not leaving. I know. But I need you to know it's not just because we need the help. It's because... He stopped, then pushed through. It's because I love you. I love who you are. I love how you fight for us. I love that you see broken things and decide they're worth fixing instead of just walking away. Evelyn felt tears threatening. I'm one of the broken things. I know, so am I. But maybe that's the point. Maybe broken people can build something strong together that neither could build alone. For a long moment, neither spoke. The barn was quiet except for the sound of horses shifting in their stalls and wind whistling through gaps in the walls. I can't have children, Evelyn said finally. I told you that when I first arrived. That hasn't changed. I know. It means I can't give you You've already given me more than I had any right to ask for. 5 kids who are thriving because you're here. A ranch that's surviving because you refuse to let it fail. A future that feels possible again. He stepped closer. I'm not asking you to give me children. I'm asking you to be my wife. To make official what's already true. That you're part of this family. That you belong here. That this is home. Gideon, I know the timing's terrible. I know we're still barely holding on financially. I know it's not romantic or proper or any of the things a proposal should be. But I'm asking anyway because life's too short and winters are too long, and I don't want to waste any more time pretending that what we have is anything less than real. Evelyn looked at this man who'd been a stranger 6 months ago. This broken widower who'd been drowning in grief and responsibility, who'd looked at her and seen not a last resort but a partner, who'd watched her risk her life repeatedly for his family and responded not with gratitude but with love. "Yes," she said. "Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I want to make this official. Yes to all of it." The smile that broke across Gideon's face was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. He crossed the space between them and kissed her, careful and tentative, like he was afraid she might disappear. She kissed him back, less carefully, letting 6 months of suppressed emotion finally surface. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "The children are going to lose their minds," Gideon said. "Probably. Nora's going to say she saw this coming. She definitely will. Caleb's going to cry happy tears. Without question. Grace is going to insist on being involved in every detail of the wedding. Absolutely. And Thomas and Marcus will somehow turn it into a competition. That's a given." They stood there in the barn, holding each other, and for the first time in longer than either could remember, the future didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something to anticipate. They told the children the next morning at breakfast. The reaction was everything they'd expected and more. Caleb did cry happy tears, though he tried to hide them. Grace immediately started planning decorations. Thomas and Marcus got into an argument about who would stand where during the ceremony. Nora just smiled and said, "About time. We were starting to think you'd never figure it out." "You knew?" Gideon asked. "We all knew. You two were the only ones pretending otherwise." She looked at Evelyn. "You're really staying? Forever?" "Forever." "Good. Because if you tried to leave now, we'd probably tie you to the porch. That's one way to keep family together. It's the frontier way." The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation mixed with the normal chaos of ranch life. Spring arrived properly, bringing mud and new calves and the 1,000 tasks that came with transitioning from winter to growing season. Evelyn and Gideon worked side by side, their partnership now acknowledged rather than hidden. The territory started hearing about the upcoming wedding. Neighbors offered congratulations. Martha Collins volunteered to help with preparations. Even the territorial commissioner sent a note expressing his approval and pleasure that Black Hollow Ranch would continue as a family operation. The only person who didn't send congratulations was Mercer Crow. That silence was somehow more ominous than threats would have been. "He's planning something," Evelyn said one evening while she and Gideon reviewed ranch accounts. "Probably. But there's nothing left for him to take. We paid the mortgage. The boundary dispute is settled. We survived winter. Men like him don't need logical reasons to cause trouble. Wounded pride is enough. Then we stay vigilant, but we don't let fear of what he might do stop us from living." 2 weeks before the wedding, Mercer's move came. A lawyer arrived at the ranch with documents claiming that Gideon owed back taxes on a section of land that had been disputed years earlier. The amount was substantial, the deadline was immediate, and conveniently, Mercer Crow was willing to purchase the section in question for enough to cover the supposed debt. "This is fabricated," Evelyn said, reading through the documents. "The dates don't match territorial records. The land description is deliberately vague. This is harassment dressed as legal process." "Doesn't matter if it's fabricated if we have to spend money we don't have fighting it in court," Gideon pointed out. "Then we don't fight it in court. We fight it in public." "What does that mean?" "It means we take this to the newspaper. Let everyone see what Mercer's doing. Make it so public and so obviously vindictive that no judge would rule in his favor without looking corrupt. Newspapers are expensive, and they don't typically side with small ranchers over wealthy landowners. They do when the story is good enough. In this story, widow tries to steal land from family who just survived winter and a child's illness. That's the kind of story people remember. Evelyn rode to the territorial newspaper office the next day. The editor, a cynical man named Crawford who'd seen every scheme the frontier had to offer, listened to her pitch with obvious skepticism. "Why should I care about a land dispute between two ranchers?" "Because it's not just two ranchers. It's a pattern. Mercer Crow has been systematically driving out smaller operations for years. I've got witnesses, documentation, a story that'll sell papers and expose corruption." Crawford leaned back in his chair. You got proof of this pattern? Everything that was presented at the Land Commission hearing, plus additional testimony from families he's ruined. And you're willing to go on record? Completely. Even knowing it'll make you a target? I've been a target since I arrived. Might as well make it count for something. Crawford studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. I like you. You've got spine. All right, I'll run the story, but I need everything you've got, and I need it verified. Evelyn spent the next 3 days gathering documentation and witness statements. Martha Collins provided detailed accounts. Other ruined ranchers came forward with their stories. By the time Evelyn delivered the complete file to Crawford, it was damning. The story ran on the front page 2 days later. The headline read, Wealthy Ranchers' Campaign of Intimidation Exposed. The article detailed years of suspicious land acquisitions, mysterious accidents, and legal harassment. It named Mercer Crowe explicitly. It quoted witnesses. It presented documentation that made the pattern undeniable. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Territorial authorities announced an investigation. Other newspapers picked up the story. Ranchers who'd been too afraid to speak out suddenly found courage in numbers. Within a week, Mercer Crowe went from powerful landowner to public villain. His attempt to collect fabricated back taxes was quietly withdrawn. The wedding happened on the first Saturday in April, when the mountains finally shook off winter completely and wildflowers started appearing in the high meadows. They kept it simple, a ceremony in the ranch house with neighbors and friends gathered. Martha Collins stood as witness, tears streaming down her face through the entire ceremony. Dr. Weber attended, looking pleased with himself for reasons nobody quite understood. The territorial commissioner made an appearance, along with Crawford, the newspaper editor, who brought a photographer to document what he called the feel-good story of the season. Grace scattered flower petals with such enthusiasm that they ended up everywhere except where they were supposed to be. Thomas and Marcus behaved for exactly 10 minutes before getting into trouble involving the refreshment table and a suspicious amount of cake. Caleb cried through the entire ceremony, happy tears that he didn't bother hiding this time. And Nora stood beside Evelyn, serving as what the girl insisted on calling the witness for the bride, wearing a dress that Evelyn had helped her make and an expression of fierce pride. When Gideon and Evelyn exchanged vows, the words were simple, but weighted with everything they'd survived together. The promises they made weren't about romance or idealized futures. They were about showing up, about staying, about choosing each other every day, even when the days were hard. Especially when the days were hard. After the ceremony, the celebration spilled outside into the spring afternoon. Neighbors brought food. Someone produced a fiddle. Children ran wild through the property. Adults traded stories and laughter, and the kind of camaraderie that only comes from shared struggle. At one point, Evelyn found herself standing slightly apart from the crowd, watching the scene unfold. This ramshackle collection of people, damaged ranchers, struggling families, survivors of winter and violence and loss, had become something more than neighbors. They'd become a community, bound together not by proximity, but by the understanding that survival was a collective effort. Martha Collins approached, carrying 2 cups of punch. You did this, she said, handing one to Evelyn. Did what? Built something from nothing, gave people hope when they'd forgotten how to have it. Martha gestured at the gathering. 6 months ago, most of these people were isolated, scared, convinced they had to face everything alone. You showed them different. Don't diminish it. You took on Mercer Crowe when nobody else would. You assembled witnesses. You exposed corruption. You made it safe for the rest of us to stop hiding. Martha's voice was fierce. My husband died believing nobody would ever hold Mercer accountable. But you did. And that matters more than you know. Before Evelyn could respond, Gideon appeared with Caleb on his shoulders and Grace attached to his leg. There you are. Children are demanding the bride participate in whatever game they've invented that definitely involves mud. Sounds delightful. It's mandatory, apparently. Then I suppose I don't have a choice. As she let herself be pulled into the chaos, Evelyn caught Gideon's eye. He smiled at her, that real smile she'd worked so hard to earn, and in that moment, she understood something profound. She hadn't come to Black Hollow Ranch to save anyone. She'd come to save herself. And somewhere along the way, in choosing to stay and fight, and refuse to accept that broken things were beyond repair, she'd discovered that salvation wasn't something granted by external forces. It was something built through daily choice. Through showing up when leaving would be easier, through loving people who were hard to love and letting them love you back despite your own sharp edges. The celebration continued until twilight painted the mountains purple and gold. One by one, guests departed, offering congratulations and promises to visit soon. The children, exhausted from excitement, were put to bed with minimal protest. Finally, the house was quiet. Gideon and Evelyn stood on the porch together, watching the last light fade from the sky. "Any regrets?" Gideon asked. "About what?" "About saying yes to that advertisement. About coming here. About all of this." Evelyn thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago. Alone, purposeless, convinced that the world had no place for someone like her. She thought about the journey north through brutal terrain, about meeting 5 damaged children and a drowning widower, about choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. "No regrets," she said finally. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even though it's hard, especially because it's hard. Easy things don't teach you who you really are. They just let you coast. But hard things, surviving winter, facing down enemies, building family from strangers, that's what shows you what you're capable of." "And what are you capable of?" "More than I thought. More than anyone thought." She leaned against him. "Turns out I'm not just the woman nobody wanted. I'm the woman everyone needed, including myself." Spring turned to summer. The ranch flourished in ways it hadn't for years. Cattle herds grew. Fences got repaired properly. The children thrived under the stability of having 2 parents who weren't just surviving but building something together. Word spread through the territory about the impossible woman who'd ridden through blizzards and faced down Mercer Crow. Other struggling ranchers started coming to Evelyn for advice. Women who'd been isolated in remote homesteads found someone who understood their struggles. One afternoon in late summer, a young woman arrived at the ranch. Thin, exhausted, alone. She clutched a letter that was nearly identical to the one Evelyn had received the year before. "I'm responding to an advertisement," the woman said, "for work at a ranch near Silver Creek, but I got lost and someone said to try here. Said a woman named Evelyn Vale might be able to help." Evelyn studied the woman, seeing herself a year ago, desperate, lost, looking for any door that might still be open. "That advertisement's already been filled," Evelyn said gently. "But I know other ranches that need help. Good people who won't take advantage. Want me to make some introductions?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You'd do that?" "Of course. Nobody should have to navigate this territory alone." She glanced at the woman's threadbare coat. "Come inside, get warm, have some food. We'll figure out where you're supposed to be." The woman followed her into the house, relief evident in every line of her body. After she left 2 days later, fed, rested, and with multiple job offers from reputable ranchers, Gideon found Evelyn standing by the fence, watching the sunset. "You gave her my mother's coat," he observed. "She needed it more than I did. And half our winter food stores. We'll manage?" "You're going to save every lost woman who comes through here, aren't you?" "If I can. Someone gave me a chance when I was lost. Seems fair to pass that forward." "You know, most people don't think that way." "Most people aren't as lucky as I am." "Lucky how?" "Lucky to have learned that family isn't what you're born into. It's what you build. Lucky to have found people worth fighting for. Lucky to have survived long enough to realize that broken doesn't mean worthless. That being unwanted by some people just means you haven't found your people yet." Gideon wrapped his arms around her from behind. "You found your people." "Yeah, I did." They stood there as the light faded and stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Behind them, the house glowed with lamplight and the sound of children arguing over something inconsequential. The barn still needed work. The north fence was sagging again. Winter would come eventually, bringing new challenges and new tests of their resilience. But they'd face it together. That night, after the house fell silent and the children were asleep, Evelyn lay awake thinking about the journey that had brought her here, about the doctor's diagnosis that had felt like the end of everything, about the advertisement that had seemed like a last desperate option, about the decision to ride north into mountains that killed people who weren't careful. She thought about Nora's initial hostility and slow transformation, about Caleb's trust that had taken weeks to earn, about Grace's small hand in hers, about Thomas and Marcus and their chaotic energy, about Gideon's smile returning after years of absence, She thought about what it meant to build family, not through blood, but through choice, through daily decision to show up and stay and fight for each other, even when, especially when, things were hard. And she realized something that would have seemed impossible a year ago. She was happy. Not the uncomplicated happiness of fairy tales where problems disappeared and futures were certain, but the complicated, hard-earned happiness of someone who'd survived impossible odds and come out the other side transformed. She'd arrived at Black Hollow Ranch believing she was a woman with no future. What she'd found instead was a future she hadn't known she was allowed to want. She'd thought she was accepting a job. What she'd actually done was come home. Years later, long after the immediate struggles had faded into memory, people would still tell stories about the winter Black Hollow Ranch nearly died. About the woman who rode through a killing blizzard to save a child who wasn't hers by blood, but was hers in every way that mattered. The stories would grow with retelling, as stories do. Details would blur, facts would become legend, but the heart of it would remain true. That family is what you create, not what you're given. That belonging is earned through shared struggle, not granted by blood. That sometimes the people the world decides are unwanted are simply waiting for someone to see their worth. And that survival, real survival, is never about just staying alive. It's about finding reasons to keep living when all the easy reasons have been taken away. Evelyn had come to Black Hollow Ridge believing she was broken. What she learned was that broken things can be stronger once they're put back together. That cracks don't make something worthless. They just make it human. That the world's rejection didn't define her value. That love wasn't something reserved for perfect people with perfect histories. It was something built between imperfect people who chose to see each other's worth despite the damage. She thought she was hiring on to help raise someone else's children. What she'd actually done was become a mother in every way that mattered. She'd thought she was working to save a failing ranch. What she'd actually done was build a home. And as she finally drifted to sleep with Gideon beside her, and her children safe in their rooms and the mountains standing eternal watch over the valley, Evelyn understood the most important truth of all. She hadn't been saved by this family. They'd all saved each other. And that was how survival worked. Not through individual strength or solitary determination, but through the messy, difficult, beautiful work of people choosing to hold each other up when the weight of the world tried to drive them down. That was the real story of Black Hollow Ranch. Not about a woman nobody wanted, but about how family is built by the people brave enough to stay when everyone else walks away. About how broken doesn't mean finished. About how the end of one dream can be the beginning of something better if you're willing to see it. About how sometimes the last door life leaves open is exactly the one you were meant to walk through all along.